Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Dear listeners, when in a second you hear the introduction to this episode, you're going to think that this is going to be a single episode on hunger management for fat loss, but it's actually split into two parts because the single episode turned into a monster solo recording. I truly surprised myself with how long I can spend talking to myself. Clearly, I really love the sound of my own voice. Anyway, today I've got part one of this mini series on hunger management strategies for fat loss, and next week you're gonna hear part two. Let's get straight into it. Yo, hello and welcome back to the podcast, and thank you so much for being here with me, myself, and I as I sit down to discuss how to manage hunger on a fat loss diet. Now, it won't surprise anyone to find out that I actually wrote a blog article on the same topic titled A Comprehensive Guide to Feeling Fuller on Your Weight Loss Diet, and you'll find a link to that in the show notes. However, I highly recommend you stick around for the whole podcast because there are going to be tidbits in here that are new and never seen before in any article I've ever written. So, hunger is one of the main challenges of a fat loss diet. And in this podcast, I am going to cover 3 categories of strategies that you can apply in order to manage it as best as possible. And these categories include mindset strategies, daily habits, and food choices. However, if you've been listening to this podcast at least once, then you may know that I really like to start with definitions so that we're all on the same page. So, to start with, what even is hunger? It is actually a complex phenomenon that researchers are still studying to this day. A practical definition of hunger that can help you in pursuit of fat loss is that hunger can be measured, so it's not an on and off switch. You're not hungry or not hungry, but it's rather a spectrum. And it's also not the only reason that we eat, as we can also eat when we're not hungry. In order to measure hunger, I like to use a hunger scale, and there are several that you can find on the internet. An example would be a 1 to 10 scale, where 1 would be you're so hungry that you're starving and you have no energy, and the higher you go, the more full you become. So 5 would be you start to feel hungry, you're a little bit peckish, and 10 is you're so stuffed you're actually feeling nauseous. And it can be really helpful to take a moment to rate your hunger when you feel it so that you can make an informed decision on whether it's really necessary for you to eat. Maybe you're a 1 and you're about to pass out, or whether you can actually wait and you don't need to respect your hunger at that particular moment in time. Moreover, knowing that we don't just eat because we're hungry, you can then start to try to learn how to distinguish between the different reasons why you may feel a desire to eat. And sometimes that desire to eat will be legitimately linked to hunger, or rather the specific type of hunger called homeostatic hunger, which is the need to eat in order to refuel your body, or whether the reasons are different. Maybe you're feeling some peer pressure because you're at a social event, or maybe you are craving something and not really wanting to eat because you're truly hungry. Getting to know your own hunger, being able to rate it and knowing where it stems from can help you make decisions that are more in line with your fitness goals. And that's why defining hunger is such an important topic to start with. Now, having covered that, let's get into the first of the three categories of strategies that I have in mind to cover, and that's mindset strategies. As you know by now, I am a huge fan of mindset, and if you don't know yet, then I highly recommend you listen back to episode number 1, but also the last episode I released with Dr. Casey Orvidas, all on the topic of mindset. Anyway, my number 1 strategy to deal with hunger from a mindset perspective is to reframe that hunger. Remember that you have the privilege to go on a fat loss diet. Nobody is forcing you. Nobody's pointing a gun to your head, I hope, to force you to lose body fat. You are choosing this because it's in line with your goals, and you are so fortunate that you have the means to choose how much you eat and what specifically you eat. So it's your privilege and it's also your choice. Moreover, a helpful reframing could be to think that some hunger is normal in a calorie deficit. So assuming that your calorie target is reasonable and you're not in an excessively large deficit where your hunger is above and beyond what would be considered appropriate, then if you're feeling hungry, it means that the deficit is working and it's appropriate for your goals. That's what I like to think about when I'm dieting, and it really helps me. If I feel a little bit of hunger throughout the day that I don't normally feel at maintenance, I'm thinking, yeah, this is working. And it also helps to be patient and trust the process. My second strategy is to sit with the hunger. Generally, both hunger and cravings, and the, let's call it, scientific term for cravings is hedonic hunger. So a type of hunger that we experience not because we need energy, but because we want the kind of sense of reward that we get from eating highly palatable foods like high sugar and high fat foods. You know what I'm talking about: pizza, chips, fries, ice cream, cookies, and so on and so forth. Now, both homeostatic hunger, so the hunger that you feel because you truly need energy, and hedonic hunger or cravings tend to develop, rise over time, they reach a peak, and then they also fall over time. And this tends to occur over 15 to 30 minutes. So don't dive straight into the fridge as soon as you realize that you would want to eat. Instead, pause, observe that hunger, and ask yourself, is this hunger, as in homeostatic hunger, do I truly need energy now? Is this a craving? What's the reason for my hunger, and what's my hunger level now? Can I wait another 10 to 20 minutes? And whether you realize that it's real hunger, so homeostatic hunger, or a craving, consider the consequences that eating those calories is going to have. Choosing to eat is neither good nor bad, but is it worth it in that specific moment in time? Or might you be able to wait for 10 to 20 minutes to see if this urge that you're experiencing goes away, and you're able to continue on with your day until the next planned meal or snack that you have. As a quick and hopefully valuable side note on cravings, most of us experience them, not only during a fat loss diet, but generally. We're exposed to food all day long via commercials, via social media, just by seeing food in a shop when we're walking around. So cravings are normal, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with satisfying a craving. The unfortunate truth is that most of the foods we tend to crave aren't exactly easy to fit into a fat loss diet because they're usually high in calories, fats, and carbohydrates. So you would probably benefit from, upon embarking on a fat loss diet, making a choice on what you believe would be the most appropriate strategy for you to deal with cravings as they come up. For example, some people can be what generally is known as moderators. So they can have a small amount of a food that they crave, go on with their day, and be totally fine. And when I get clients like this, I usually recommend that they set aside maybe 10 to 15% of their total daily calories to satisfy that craving, that hedonic hunger. Because for them, having this small daily treat can make the difference between what would be a sustainable diet and what would be a non-sustainable diet. So if I took away that craving and I told them just eat whole foods all of the time, they wouldn't be able to be consistent. Now, on the other hand, some people are more of the abstainer type of person, whereby if they have even a small amount of a food that they crave, they simply can't control themselves. And so, for those people, a better strategy would be to abstain from these cravings, to fill their diet with whole foods that really help with fat loss. And potentially, when I have clients with this personality, I tend to plan and to be very careful to consult with them on when it may be appropriate to include diet breaks away from a calorie deficit so that they do have the flexibility to satisfy their hedonic hunger a little bit more often. And also, if not shorter diet breaks, longer phases at maintenance and not in a calorie deficit. Not to say that I wouldn't plan maintenance phases and diet breaks for moderators, of course, but with an abstainer, I don't want to reach their breaking point to where they've abstained for so long that now they're on the verge of eating their entire pantry. So it's important that you understand which type of person you are and which approach works best for you. However, I also wouldn't identify with abstainer or moderator for life, because as human beings, we are very fluid. So at one season in your life, you might be more of a moderator, but then in another season of your life, you may be more of an abstainer. Or maybe when you're at maintenance calories, you're able to moderate because you're less hungry. But in a fat loss phase, you tend to suffer from hunger quite a bit, so you need to be an abstainer. So try to adopt a fluid approach towards these categories of people, so to speak. Don't strictly identify with one or the other, because you're only limiting yourself at the end of the day. And that's it for the aside on cravings. Now, moving on to the next category of strategies to deal with hunger, I'm going to discuss daily habits that can be really helpful. And number one is to stay busy. You might have noticed that the easiest time for you to diet is when you're at work, because you always have something to do. There's always something on your mind. You simply don't have that much time to think about food. But then the wheels tend to fall off when the weekend comes, because you no longer have that structure, you're no longer that busy, you have all the time in the world to think, I'm hungry, what could I eat now? And that's why when you're not busy, if you realize that you're struggling with hunger more, you want to fill your schedule with mindful activities. And I am emphasizing mindful because it's important. If you're Netflix and chilling, it's not very mindful, your mind is likely to wander over to the fridge. Some examples of more mindful activities include working out, reading, going out for a walk, writing or journaling, playing video games, talking to someone on the phone, playing board games, hanging out with people in general. You can choose anything you like as long as it keeps your mind engaged. Strategy number two is to adopt regular meal times and ideally the same number of meals and snacks, which I'll call eating occasions as a whole, every day or at least most days, because this regularity is underrated in how it can help regulate not only your hunger levels, but all of the rhythms that run the human body. Because your eating pattern is one of your circadian rhythms, which are daily rhythms that reset every 24 hours and that manage our body. And they include eating and sleeping, for example. And when they're running on schedule, so to speak, then they contribute to maintaining manageable hunger levels, reliable energy levels. They contribute to the release of specific hormones at appropriate times. For example, you release melatonin at the right time so that it helps you fall asleep and not when you don't need it and it makes you groggy. Basically, by adopting a more regular meal pattern, you're going to help your body run as best as it can, which can then help you feel your best and respond best to your diet. Now, of course, adopting a regular meal pattern isn't the only rhythm, so it's not going to be a complete game changer, but it is one component of all of the rhythms that you want to do your best to modulate appropriately to get the best results possible, not only from a fat loss diet, but from any nutritional phase that you may be in and any training protocol that you may be following. My suggestion to clients is usually to choose a number of eating occasions, including snacks and meals, that works for them most days. And I would keep that to between 3 eating occasions and 6 eating occasions. Once you've chosen how many eating occasions you want to have, I would then distribute them across the day. So I would assign a 2-hour time frame to each eating occasion, and I would try to maintain a regular pattern to where you're eating every 3 to 5 hours. So you're trying not to go more than 5 hours without eating, but also you're trying not to eat every 1 or 2 hours, because at that point you're grazing all day. And both these two extremes wouldn't be ideal. As a very simple example, let's say you choose to have 3 eating occasions and they are breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You could schedule your breakfast between 7 and 9 a.m. Then you could schedule your lunch between 12 and 2 p.m. And then you could schedule your dinner between 5 and 7 p.m. So that, again, you're eating at somewhat regular intervals every 3 to 5 hours, and you're eating the same number of meals every day. You are training your body to expect food at a certain time of day, so your body is going to learn to release your hunger hormones at those times of day, so that you don't get random hunger pangs that distract you and that make the fat loss diet unnecessarily harder at weird times of day. The third daily habit that I recommend is related to the second one, and is to plan your meal times following your hunger patterns, because not everybody is hungry at the same time of day. And when you're at maintenance or in a caloric surplus, you have more calories available. You're not meant to experience a great degree of hunger. So even if your meal pattern is a little bit more flexible and it isn't necessarily matching the best times when you feel the ideal level of hunger to eat, then it's not that big of a deal. However, when you have fewer calories available, you have to be more strategic with your plan to make your fat loss diet successful, to ensure that you can be consistent with the deficit. So planning to eat when you're actually hungry is a lot more important. I've had a lot of clients who told me, I eat breakfast because it's a habit, but I'm not really hungry until 11 a.m. Then why don't you simply skip breakfast and have your first meal at 11 a.m.? We often follow patterns in our daily life because we're used to them, even if they don't necessarily serve us. So that's why having a coach is helpful, because they have an outside perspective. They don't have your habits. They're not as ingrained in their brain as they are in your brain. So they can tell you, hey, you're doing this, but it doesn't really make sense based on what you're telling me that you're struggling with. So how about you try something else? And this is one of those times when you might be in the habit of eating breakfast at 7 a.m. because that's what you've always done, but you're not hungry at all. And then you get to the end of the day and you're actually still hungry at 10 p.m. because you're more of a night owl than a morning lark, so to speak. But you don't have any more calories because you ate your breakfast too early. So planning your meals strategically is a really powerful strategy to manage your hunger. The fourth daily habit that I recommend is to have an effective sleep routine so that you can get an adequate amount of good quality sleep. Because I don't have to cite any research. There is research on it, but we all know that when we don't sleep, we feel hangry. We don't want to move as much because we're tired, and we tend to crave sugar and fat more. And we also tend to find it difficult to focus and make decisions. And you know what this is? It's a recipe for disaster during a fat loss diet. So don't underestimate the impact of protecting your sleep. And circling back to what I explained about circadian rhythms, sleep is another circadian rhythm. So regulating it, making sure that you're going to bed and waking up at roughly the same time most days, and that you're getting enough hours of good quality sleep to feel refreshed and rested when you wake up, is going to be really valuable to help you maintain reliable energy levels, enough focus to make choices in line with your goals, and to keep your hunger levels to a degree that's manageable for you. The final daily habit that I recommend is slow down when you're eating. There's a lot of research that shows that eating slowly can decrease hunger. And you might also have realized in your own experience that when you're scarfing down a meal in 5 seconds flat, you start feeling hungry approximately 42 seconds later. And now you've got another 3 hours until the next meal. And you're in a fat loss diet, so you're not eating the usual amount of calories that would keep you satiated. That is definitely not a pleasant experience. And this is coming from someone who used to be the fastest eater in my family. When I was young, I would sit down at the table. I would be done with my meal in 5 minutes flat. I kid you not. And I was eating usually with 3 more people, one of my parents and then my 2 younger brothers. And my mother enforced the rule that I couldn't leave the table until everybody was done. So what I would do was I would get a book and I would spend 20 minutes reading while everybody else was eating because I was already done. And I had to train myself to really slow down and appreciate the eating experience. And it helped me regulate my hunger levels massively. In fact, I was overweight when I was a child and a teenager. And yes, my experience losing weight at first wasn't the healthiest because, as I covered in episode 6, when I discussed my own personal story, I suffered from an eating disorder and then disordered eating habits, whereby I was severely restricting my food intake. However, once I got over that massive hurdle, eating slowly was really a game changer to teach me to feel and rate and define my own hunger. And it is really empowering. So, in order to slow down when you're eating, try the following strategies. Sit down instead of standing up whenever possible. Keep phones, screens, and all other distractions away. Chew your food thoroughly. You don't need to count your chews because, who's gonna actually do that and who has the patience for that other than the Dalai Lama? There's a reason he's the Dalai Lama and we're not. And that's that he can be patient enough to count however many times he chews his milk. I cannot do that. But what you can do, what I can do, is we can chew each mouthful for long enough so that the texture of the food turns to mush before we swallow. As a side note, that also really helps digestion because the more mushy the food is as it enters our GI tract, the easier it's going to be to be digested and absorbed so that you avoid unpleasant side effects like gas, excessive bloating, and other digestive distress. Another suggestion is to put your cutlery down between bites. So you put a forkful in your mouth, put the damn fork down, and take a break. You can also drink between bites. I wouldn't necessarily recommend to drink a huge amount of water throughout a whole meal, but if you sip on a glass of water every now and then to prolong the meal a little bit more as you're training yourself to slow down, that can be helpful. And a final suggestion is to set an alarm so that it goes off 15 to 20 minutes after the start of your meal, and your aim is to finish your meal either when the alarm goes off or after it, not before. And that wraps up the daily habits category. As always, dear listeners, thank you for listening. My links are in the show notes if you want to get in touch with me. And until next time. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.